Humanity had always been an anomaly in the galaxy, a young species with no ancient empires, no godlike patrons, no genetic advantages. Yet from the moment they stepped beyond their star, observers noticed something unsettling in the way humans moved through the void. They didn't expand through conquest or intimidation like so many rising civilizations before them. Instead, they traveled with an unnerving calm, as though they were preparing for something far larger than the rest of the galaxy could comprehend. Their ships were unremarkable on the surface, their diplomacy polite, their requests modest. There was no bluster, no declaration of military intent, nothing that suggested the terrifying potential hidden beneath the surface. And that very restraint misled the galactic Concord into believing humanity was harmless. For centuries, the Concord had been the self-proclaimed arbiter of the galaxy. With dozens of species under its authority, it grew accustomed to forcing compliance whenever negotiations failed. Countless smaller worlds had been folded into its structure through intimidation. Any species that displayed hesitation was labeled uncooperative, and swiftly corrected under the pressure of battleships and occupation forces. Arrogance had become woven into every layer of its hierarchy, from admirals who believed their fleets were unparalleled to diplomats who saw themselves as the civilizing force of the stars. When humanity appeared, polite and technologically quiet, the Concord interpreted it as weakness. That illusion shattered the moment a Concord scouting flotilla intercepted a human long-range civilian explorer near the frontier. The vessel was designed for deep space research, carrying no weapons, no armor, and no escort. The encounter began as a routine stop, the kind Concord patrols executed 1,000 times before. Yet when the humans hesitated to comply with an invasive boarding attempt, a minor skirmish broke out, leading to the ship's destruction. The alien officers filed reports describing the incident as unfortunate but strategically irrelevant. They expected little more than diplomatic noise. If the past was any indication, humanity would lodge formal complaints, be placated with apologies, and retreat from confrontation. But the humans didn't respond with protest. They responded with silence. The moment the ship's black box reached Earth, something shifted across the entire Sol system. Defense networks activated in perfect synchronicity. Sleeper protocols, long maintained but never deployed, came alive as encrypted signals spread across human space. Entire fleets that had never been publicly acknowledged emerged from Titan's shadow, the Oort cloud's hidden shipyards, and dark space orbital hubs that most Concord scouts had failed to detect. It wasn't chaotic, emotional mobilization, it was precise, disciplined, and unsettlingly quiet. Humanity had not been caught off guard, they had been preparing for centuries for the possibility that one day someone would underestimate them. Inside the Concord, early reports of human fleet movement were brushed aside. Analysts confidently predicted that the humans were simply repositioning defensive forces to project strength. Others suggested it was an attempt to secure border worlds out of fear. Every interpretation was filtered through the same flawed assumption: humans were incapable of threatening a galactic superpower. The idea that they possessed fleets capable of major operations was dismissed as paranoia. Yet cracks began to appear. Patrol ships vanished without sending distress signals. Recon drones returned corrupted data that made no logical sense. Ghost signatures flickered across sensor grids, impossible to classify with Concord technology. Officers whispered uneasily about a pattern forming, though none dared to voice the possibility that humanity was orchestrating something deliberate. Even then, they didn't grasp the scale of the error they had made. Their entire military doctrine was rooted in the belief that no young species could challenge them. Meanwhile, humanity observed every Concord movement with cold precision. Each strategic shift, each fleet deployment, each diplomatic message was analyzed and catalogued. They weren't preparing to negotiate. They were preparing to end the problem before it grew into a larger threat. To them, the destruction of their research vessel was more than an accident. It was a message. And humanity had no intention of letting that message go unanswered. Across the galaxy, whispers began to spread among neutral factions. They noticed the way human ships moved, faster, cleaner, quieter than anyone had believed possible. They noticed entire constellations around Sol going dark, as military networks transitioned into wartime operations. Most alarming of all, they noticed the absence of human broadcasts. Humans had always been communicative, flooding the stars with exploration data and open discussions. Now, nothing left their territory except encrypted signals no one could decipher. The Concorde still clung to its confidence, still certain that no species could truly threaten them. But deep within their intelligence centers, a few analysts began to panic, recognizing too late that the humans weren't posturing or negotiating. They were preparing. By the time the first clear reports arrived, showing a fleet unlike any the Concorde had recorded, it was already too late to undo the mistake. The aliens had provoked a force they didn't understand. And the silence from Sol was no longer a sign of fear. It was the last calm breath before humanity moved. The first clear image of the Terran response arrived in the form of a single grainy transmission captured by a Concorde deep-range probe. At first, analysts dismissed it as corrupted data. The silhouette was too massive, too angular, too advanced to belong to a young species. But when multiple probes returned identical readings, the truth became unavoidable. Humanity had deployed a fleet far beyond anything the Concorde had ever catalogued. These ships didn't match any known human designs. Their hulls were constructed from alloys the Concorde couldn't identify, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Their energy signatures fluctuated with patterns that no existing engine model could replicate. Every detail contradicted the long-standing belief that humans were technologically inferior. Once the 7th Expeditionary Fleet revealed itself, the Concorde's intelligence division struggled to reconcile the impossible. Their records indicated humanity possessed only 9 operational fleets, all rated as regional defense groups. The 7th was listed as inactive, supposedly shut down after internal restructuring. Yet here it was, larger, more advanced, and far more organized than anything in their archives. The idea that humans had maintained hidden military infrastructure on such a scale was beyond anything the Concorde considered plausible. Their arrogance had blinded them to the signs. Human expansion had been slow, not because of weakness, but because resources were being diverted to classified projects no one had noticed. Within hours, the first engagement shattered every remaining illusion. A Concorde patrol formation consisting of 3 cruisers, a destroyer, and a dozen drones intercepted a lone Terran vessel. The aliens entered the encounter with complete confidence. Their formation was standard, their weapons primed, and their doctrine clear. They expected a quick victory or at worst a brief exchange. Instead, the confrontation lasted less than 12 seconds. The human ship released a pulse of energy that bypassed shields entirely, disabling every Concorde system simultaneously. The cruisers went dark. Their engines shut down, their sensors collapsed, and even emergency backups failed. Another beam followed, striking with surgical precision and severing weapons arrays without breaching hulls. No casualties. No theatrics. Just overwhelming control. The survivors who managed to transmit emergency logs described the human ship as something unnatural, moving with an elegance and certainty impossible for a vessel of its mass. It adjusted vectors mid-flight without inertial lag. It fired weapons the Concorde had no classification for. It outmaneuvered drones designed for high-speed interception as if predicting their movements before they executed them. The patrol never stood a chance, and for the first time in centuries, a Concorde combat group was defeated without inflicting a single casualty. Panic seeped through the alien command structure like a spreading fracture. Senior officers demanded updated threat assessments. None of the analysts could provide answers. Some argued the humans had acquired ancient precursor technology. Others insisted the encounter was staged or exaggerated. But every new report aligned with the same conclusion: the Terran fleet operated at a technological tier the Concorde had never prepared to face. And the worst part was the consistency. Every human engagement followed a pattern, quick, controlled, and devastatingly efficient. Still, arrogance persisted. The Concorde High Council claimed it was impossible for humans to sustain operations beyond isolated skirmishes. They believed the first victory was luck or a fluke of battlefield conditions. They mobilized a larger formation to intercept what they assumed was a small expeditionary force. But as their fleets moved, they failed to understand the real danger. Humans were tracking every deployment, predicting every maneuver, mapping every possible response before the Concorde made it. While the Concorde scrambled between denial and fear, humanity advanced with chilling discipline. Their ships never broadcast open signals, never issued warnings, never sent threats. They moved in total silence, their formation shifting through dark space with predatory focus. Each vessel acted as if it were part of a single vast consciousness, sharing data at speeds no Concorde network could match. When aliens attempted to scan the fleet, their sensors returned nothing but void. The Terran ships erased themselves from detection systems at will. Internal Concorde communication became frantic. Reports of disappearing patrols multiplied. Entire listening posts went dark. Scattered transmissions spoke of shadows sliding across starfields, followed by systems failing without apparent cause. Some tried to argue these were malfunctions or coincidences, but the pattern grew impossible to ignore. Something was advancing through their territory with ruthless precision. When the first detailed recordings of Terran formations reached high command, the realization struck with undeniable force. The humans hadn't mobilized a desperate defensive force. They had deployed a specialized fleet designed for rapid, overwhelming response, one that had clearly been prepared long before the Concorde's provocation. And for the first time in its long rule, the Concorde understood what it meant to face a species that never wanted war but had built the perfect machine for ending one. Humanity wasn't reacting emotionally. They were executing a plan. The Concorde realized too late that the humans were no longer responding to individual incidents. They were dismantling an entire war machine. Supply routes that had fed alien fleets for centuries began to collapse in rapid succession. Convoys vanished mid-transit without distress calls or debris fields. Forward depots went dark simultaneously across multiple sectors, their defensive grids neutralized with such precision that automated failsafes never triggered. The speed of the collapse defied logic. No conventional force could strike that many targets across that much territory without exposing itself. Yet the Terran fleet remained untouchable, striking everywhere while being seen nowhere. Alien admirals attempted to adapt, shifting from offensive maneuvering to hardened defensive formations. Fleets clustered tightly, overlapping shields and pooling firepower in hopes of forcing a decisive engagement. It only made them easier to control. Human targeting algorithms exploited the predictability instantly, disabling command vessels first, then isolating subordinate ships by severing coordination links. Entire armadas found themselves blind, deaf, and drifting, unable to tell whether they were surrounded or alone. Panic spread as crews realized their greatest strength, numbers, had become a liability. Psychological collapse followed swiftly. Concorde crews had been raised on the belief that their fleets were invincible, that no species dared challenge them directly. Now they faced an enemy that refused to fight on expected terms. Human ships never pressed reckless attacks or sought dramatic annihilation. They appeared briefly, struck decisively, and vanished before return fire could be calculated. Rumors began circulating among alien crews of a silent doctrine, a human method of war that focused not on destruction, but control. The idea was more terrifying than slaughter. Ships disabled but intact became floating reminders of helplessness. The most unsettling revelation came from captured telemetry. Humans were deliberately avoiding unnecessary casualties. When they struck weapon systems, they left life support untouched. When engines were disabled, escape pods remained functional. Boarding operations, when they occurred, were swift and non-lethal. Armored human soldiers moved with methodical precision, bypassing alien troops without provocation, sealing bulkheads, shutting down reactors, and withdrawing once objectives were achieved. Concorde officers who survived these encounters described the humans not as berserk aggressors, but as professionals executing an unpleasant duty with ruthless restraint. That restraint shattered morale faster than brutality ever could. The Concorde had built its authority on fear, on the certainty that resistance meant extinction. Humanity offered a different terror, proof that the Concorde could be defeated without being destroyed. Entire fleets surrendered the moment Terran signatures appeared on their sensors. Others attempted retreat, only to find their jump drives remotely disabled before they could escape. The galaxy had never witnessed a force capable of imposing compliance without extermination, and it left the Concorde psychologically unarmed. As the campaign progressed, human strategy became unmistakably clear. They were not conquering territory. They were surgically removing the Concorde's ability to wage war. Shipyards were rendered inert without detonations. Training academies lost power and data access overnight. Command networks collapsed under cyber intrusions so advanced that Concorde engineers couldn't even trace their entry point. Every system designed for aggression was neutralized, while civilian infrastructure remained untouched. It was a message written in action rather than words. The breaking point came when the Concorde deployed one of its superdreadnought formations, a symbol of absolute authority meant to crush rebellion and restore order. The fleet entered contested space with full confidence, broadcasting dominance across every channel. Within minutes, Terran vessels emerged from sensor-blind spots the Concorde believed impossible. The engagement was brief and catastrophic. Coordinated electromagnetic strikes froze the dreadnoughts in place, followed by precision breaches that neutralized command crews without compromising hull integrity. The largest military symbol in Concorde history was rendered powerless in less than an hour. Word spread faster than official reports could suppress it. Across the Concorde, officers and civilians alike reached the same realization: this was not a war humanity wanted, but it was one they had designed to win completely. The Concorde hadn't faced an uprising or a rival empire. They had provoked a species that treated warfare as a last resort, and had perfected it precisely because they hoped never to use it. By the time Concorde leadership acknowledged the scale of the disaster, the truth was undeniable. Humanity wasn't escalating. They were concluding the conflict. And there was nothing the Concorde could do to stop what had already been set in motion. The Concorde gathered the largest armada it had assembled in generations, an entire wall of ships stretching across a star system. Thousands of vessels, dreadnoughts, carriers, cruisers, gunships, formed a multi-layered barrier of overlapping shields and saturating firepower. This was their final attempt to reassert dominance, to prove that sheer numbers and historical prestige could overwhelm anything humanity deployed. Commanders assured their subordinates that no fleet, no matter how advanced, could break through a formation designed to crush planetary insurgencies and repel sector-wide invasions. Confidence swelled through their ranks, masking the fear that had been spreading since the first Terran engagements. But the Terran 7th Expeditionary Fleet didn't arrive as a frontal challenge. It emerged like a surgical response coded into the fabric of space itself. Human vessels materialized from vectors the Concorde believed unreachable, bypassing gravitic choke points and slipping past astrophysical distortions unhindered. Their entry wasn't a dramatic flare of energy, but a controlled ripple, silent, precise, intentional. By the time the Concorde's sensors registered them, the Terran fleet had already locked onto every capital ship in the formation. At first, the aliens mistook the quiet for hesitation. In previous wars, species facing the Concorde would broadcast surrender requests, last warnings, or desperate threats. The Terrans sent nothing. They didn't posture. They didn't negotiate. They simply observed, analyzing thousands of ships as though the armada were a static mathematical puzzle waiting to be solved. Every Concorde weapon bank flickered to ready state, yet no order to fire came. Their admirals wanted the humans to commit first, believing a counterstrike would shatter their momentum. But hesitation became the Concorde's downfall. Humanity moved with a synchronization the galaxy had never seen. Their fleet split into multiple attack vectors, each component executing maneuvers with fractional second accuracy. Terran dreadnoughts accelerated past conventional velocity limits without destabilizing their hulls. Smaller vessels weaved between enemy formations using micro-adjustments that defied Concorde flight algorithms. The aliens scrambled to adapt, but their systems lagged behind. It was like trying to fight an opponent who could see the battlefield several seconds into the future. When the first wave of human fire struck, it didn't come in the form of explosive devastation. It came as a cascading shutdown. Terran weapons disabled shield harmonics with isolated pulses, causing overlapping defensive grids to collapse inward. Control ships lost their targeting hierarchies. Navigation clusters flickered, then died. Entire battle groups became inert sculptures of metal drifting out of formation before they fired a meaningful shot. A handful of Concord ships managed to launch volleys, but the blasts dispersed against empty space. Human vessels had relocated before the Concord's targeting systems could refresh. As parts of the Armada fell into disarray, humanity escalated with precision. Specialized strike ships cut through heavy lines, disabling engines and slicing through external weapon platforms with surgical beams. Terran interceptors locked onto missile barrages and neutralized them before the warheads armed. Cyberwarfare protocols unfolded across the battlefield, corrupting Concord command networks faster than containment procedures could activate. Communications degraded from tactical chatter to fragmented panic. In the midst of chaos, one of the Concord's super command carriers attempted to re-establish control by issuing fleet-wide directives. The Terrans reacted instantly. A formation of black-hulled ships descended upon the carrier, overwhelming its defenses not with brute force, but sequenced perfect strikes that severed every external array. Boarding pods latched onto critical points, disabling internal systems with non-lethal precision. The flagship fell silent, leaving the entire Armada leaderless. With command decapitated, the Concord's unified resistance collapsed. Individual captains attempted to surrender, retreat, or regroup, but the Terrans allowed none of it. Not through violence, through absolute control. Engines were locked down. Weapon banks froze. Jump drives were rendered inoperative. It was as if humanity had reached into every ship and switched off the will to fight. What remained was a drifting graveyard of pride, power, and arrogance. When the firing finally stopped, the battlefield lay eerily intact. Thousands of ships remained physically unharmed, yet completely powerless. The Terran fleet opened a single wideband channel. There was no anger, no fury, only a calm directive that resonated through the ruins of the Concord's most formidable fleet. Surrender. Cease all aggression. End the conflict now. The message carried no threat, but the aliens felt one all the same. They had lost not only the battle, but the illusion that they understood warfare. The Concord capitulated before the transmission ended. They had misjudged humanity from the beginning. This was not a force seeking domination. It was a force that ended wars before they grew. And it had just proven that no empire, no matter how ancient, could provoke the Terran fleet and survive intact. The surrender rippled through the Concord with a speed even their own bureaucratic networks had never achieved. Minutes after the final transmission, systems that had stood for centuries collapsed under the weight of a truth too immense to ignore. The Concord's highest councils, once symbols of authority, fell into stunned silence as reports streamed in from every sector. The Armada, the greatest projection of power they possessed, had been neutralized without mass casualties or planetary devastation. The humans had dismantled the Empire's pride with the precision of a surgeon removing a malignant growth. Nothing about the defeat aligned with the Concord's expectations of war, and that contradiction broke them more thoroughly than destruction ever could. Across the Empire's core worlds, the shock filtered down to civilian populations who had grown up believing the Concorde was the galaxy's stabilizing force. Instead, they saw human vessels drifting like silent sentinels across occupied sectors, overseeing the cessation of hostilities with an unnerving calm. Cities waited for retaliation strikes, for punitive measures, for occupation forces, but none came. Humanity's fleets did not deploy soldiers to streets, did not interfere with governance, did not demand resources. They simply watched, ensuring no one attempted to restart the conflict. That restraint unsettled the population more than open aggression would have. It revealed that the humans had no interest in ruling them. They wanted the violence to stop. Nothing more. Formerly dominant species struggled to comprehend the new balance. They had expected humanity to behave like every rising power before them, seeking tribute, territory, or political leverage. Instead, Human envoys delivered only 3 directives: demilitarize aggressive fleets, dismantle the Concord's coercive systems, and allow oppressed worlds to choose their own futures. To the species that had once benefited from Concord hierarchy, the directives felt like a purge of the old order. To those who had suffered under Concord dominance, humanity became a symbol of long-awaited relief. Neutral powers observed carefully, trying to determine whether this unexpected form of victory hid ulterior motives. They analyzed Terran movements, reviewed every intercepted transmission, and sought patterns in fleet positioning. The conclusion, reluctantly reached by their analysts, was unsettling in its simplicity. Humanity had no imperial ambitions. Their fleets had mobilized solely because one of their own had been killed. They fought because they were left no choice. And the moment the threat ended, they reverted to their original priority: prevent further conflict, then leave. Meanwhile, the Terran 7th Expeditionary Fleet continued its operations with unbroken discipline. They oversaw the deactivation of Concord military nodes, disabling each with a precision that preserved infrastructure and avoided civilian impact. Terran cyber teams restored corrupted systems to ensure medical networks, power grids, and trade hubs functioned normally. It was a form of post-conflict management the galaxy had never witnessed: efficient, impartial, and devoid of exploitation. Within weeks, former Concord member worlds held their first independent councils in generations. Many sent diplomatic messages to Earth, not out of fear, but gratitude. They spoke of relief at the dissolution of oppressive taxes, forced conscription, and cultural mandates. Even species previously hostile to humanity found themselves re-evaluating their beliefs. If humans had chosen conquest, no one could have stopped them. Their choice not to conquer revealed more about their character than any treaty or broadcast could. As stability spread, the Terran fleet prepared to withdraw. There were no celebrations, no public commendations, no elaborate displays of victory. Human crews dismantled temporary command posts, recalibrated navigation arrays, and began charting routes back to Sol with the same calm efficiency they had demonstrated throughout the conflict. To them, the campaign had been a grim necessity, not a triumph. Their mission was complete only when no threat to their people remained. The final departure shocked observers across the galaxy. The 7th Fleet exited Concord territory without leaving behind a single occupation garrison or strategic outpost. The message was unmistakable: humanity did not claim what was not theirs. They had come because they were provoked. They left because the danger was over. In the decades that followed, the story of the Terran response became required study in military academies across every major power. Not as a warning of human brutality, but as a testament to a doctrine no one had believed possible: overwhelming strength paired with overwhelming restraint. Strategists would speak the same lesson in hushed tones: provoking humanity was not merely unwise, it was suicidal. Long after the Armada faded into deep space, its presence lingered in the collective memory of the galaxy. And in every council chamber, every strategy meeting, every diplomatic negotiation, one truth shaped decisions far more effectively than fear ever had. Never give the Terran fleet a reason to move.